Welcome back to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where you'll find information on what's going on the North Fork of Long Island. We'll be focusing on issues and opportunities going on in the community, as well as people and stories from the present and the past. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 17, our guest today is Lisa Richland. She is the former director of the Floyd Memorial Library from 1989 to 2020, and we talked to her about her time growing up in Brooklyn and her time in school and what she was interested in and what attracted her to getting a library degree, and how she made it out onto the East End and how the job opportunity came up for her at Floyd Memorial Library. And she also talks about what it was like when she first got there and what improvements and opportunities came up that she really wanted to work on to improve the library, especially the expansion in 1999. And she talks about some of the other changes in the library, as well as how Greenport has changed also. So I hope you enjoy episode 17 with Lisa Richland. Thank you for taking the time to come on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So with all of the podcast episodes, I'd like to just start off with where you were born and raised.
So I was born in Manhattan, but only because that's where the hospital was. I lived my life in Brooklyn.
And what about your parents grew up in Brooklyn as well?
My parents grew up my parents were immigrants. So my mother grew up in Slutsk, which is in the Pale of Settlement. And my father grew up in Liverpool.
And say on your father's side, does his family go all the way back if you kept going back?
No, his father came from Poland, and his mother was born in the sound of Bow Bells, so she was born in London.
Did his father say why he left Poland to come to England?
His father left as a young teen and walked across Europe until he got to maybe Denmark, where he got onto a boat and as a cabin boy and got to London that way. And the story is they gave him a wheelbarrow full of fish to sell, and he sold the fish and the wheelbarrow and took off.
Wow.
He was enterprising.
Yes. And on your mother's side, you said they grew up in England?
No. And my mother's side, my mother grew up in Slutsk, which is in the Pale of Settlement. And she came here when she was 9 years old.
And did you get to meet your grandparents?
I knew my father's mother and my mother's parents, but my father's father died before I was born.
And then with your father, did he say why what age did he come over?
He was 14.
And did he tell you why he decided to come over?
He was one of 9 children, and life in Liverpool was not wealthy. And one of his brothers was killed in an automobile accident after he had come to America. And there was a life insurance policy on him. So his mother was the beneficiary, and she took the proceeds of the life insurance and lock, stock, and barrel, and 8 kids or 7 kids, however many were around at the time, she brought them to America.
And did your mom say, because you said she came over, but did she say why she came over?
Jews in Russia were not welcome.
So that was, and then
That's persuasive.
Yeah. But how old did you say she was?
She was 9 when she came here.
Mm. Her family settled in Brooklyn?
Probably in the Bronx to begin with, but I don't know.
Did she say what her parents did for a living?
Initially, my grandfather was a salesman of plywood. Apparently, it was enough to make a living, but I believe at some point they owned a soda fountain.
What about your father's side? Did you say his parents came over with him while he was?
His mother brought him and several of her children. They were born between 1901 and 1912, whichever ones. He was born in 1909, so he came with his mother.
And what did his mother do for a living?
I have no idea. I don't know how she managed, but I believe her children supported her.
So both of your parents growing up in New York, what did they end up doing for a living?
Well, they met at Knight High School at Stuyvesant, and my father was a office boy initially for Samuel Seabury, who was a well-known judge, and eventually he studied law. He didn't study law, he read law. So he didn't go to law school, but he passed his bar exam on the basis of that and became an attorney. And my mother was a social worker.
And they settled in
Brooklyn.
And then you grew up in Brooklyn as a child. How many siblings?
I had an older sister.
And how would you describe growing up in Brooklyn as a child?
It was fun. I was a grubby little street kid. I was outside all the time playing with the neighbor kids. And
but you didn't have to worry about going, like, were your parents like, oh yeah, go play outside, and you didn't have to.
Right. I grew up in Flatbush and in an apartment building, and our apartment was on the first floor, and my mother could yell out the window for me. It was classic.
Yes. And where did you go to school? You weren't in the same school for elementary, middle school.
No, I started out at PS 152, and then I went to Ethical Culture, which is a private elementary school, and from there I went to Brooklyn Friends School, which is a Quaker school, and I graduated from there.
And how was it going? I guess for high school you were at the Quaker.
Mm-hmm.
How was it going to school there?
It was fine. I was not a good student.
Oh, just...
I was that street kid, but in school.
Mm. So how were the teachers? Was it a strict schooling system? Was it taught differently than you think from like the public schools at that time? And
I don't really know what the public school education was like, but I got a really good education despite my reluctance, and I'm still very close to my classmates. And I graduated in 1962, so
yes,
it was a long time ago.
That's great.
Yeah.
And did you know what you wanted to do when you were in high school, coming out of high school?
No, I had no idea.
No. And at this time, in between, I guess, high school and coming out of high school, did you have a role model outside of your family that you could think of?
No. I did not want to be like anybody else.
Hmm. You said you were like a street kid. Like you didn't want to do the work in school, or just be unique in that you wanted to figure out your own path after?
It was a long time ago,
Hmm.
and I was interested in some things and did well in them,
Hmm.
and I was challenging.
Yes.
If I didn't like the teacher, I did not do well. My father was called into school many times.
And were your parents kind of saying, oh, you should be doing this, or what are you interested in doing after this, or even when they were called into school?
No, I was a constant disappointment and challenge.
So now, what happened after you graduated? What did you decide on doing?
Well, I went to Syracuse University. I flunked out after a year. I took a year off. I worked at the New York World's Fair in the administration. I went back to school. At the end of that year, I got married, and we moved to Brooklyn.
Mm. When you were at Syracuse for one semester?
I was at Syracuse for 2 years,
2 years.
separated by 1 year off.
What did you end up deciding on? Was it kind of a general?
Yes, it was a liberal arts. So whatever was involved in the liberal arts program was what I studied. Once I got married, and several years later, I went back to school to Syracuse as an independent student. So they had a program where was pre-computer, if you can imagine. And they had a program where you attended classes for a week every 4 months. And then I studied management, business management. So it was very focused.
And after graduating with a business management degree, what were you thinking of doing?
I was thinking of getting out of my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So since we lived in Park Slope, and my son and I went to the library almost every day, it occurred to me that would be a place that I would like to work. So I went to library school.
And then did you also was working as a real estate agent or a travel agent? Was that before?
It was before I went to library school.
That was before you went to library school? Mm-hmm. And you worked in the Brooklyn area?
Yes.
But then you said going to the library in Park Slope, you started to get interested in libraries.
Mm-hmm. It made sense to me.
Mm-hmm. And would you say as a kid, would you use the libraries a lot as well?
Always, always. I got my first library card at 5. It's the first age you could get it. And the main library in Brooklyn has a dedicated children's room with a special entrance, and that's where I went to get my card.
And then where did you decide on going to library school? I
sort of surveyed a few library schools that were not in the New York area. There was one in Washington State, one in Florida, and the one in Lexington, Kentucky, where I ended up attending.
Yes, the University of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I went to.
Did you?
For library school.
Did you?
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I had great teachers. I graduated in '89, and it was the leftover radical librarian group of professors.
Yes.
But it was a good education.
Mm-hmm. At that time, could you pick what type of library interest you were interested in, whether it was public or academic?
No, not that I recall, but the classes I took were mostly geared toward management because that was my undergraduate degree. I really, really enjoyed library school.
And what would you say was your favorite part about library school?
the basement of the main library where the old English newspapers were kept.
Would you go through,
I would read them.
read them?
Yep, I would read the English papers from the 1840s, from the,
Wow.
yeah, it was just fascinating. But, I liked all of it.
So now, after finishing, now you were kind of figuring out where you wanted to work in a library in New York, or are you open to other states?
Well, my son was still living with his father in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to be too far from him. And we owned a house on Shelter Island as a weekend house. So I didn't go back to Brooklyn. I went to Shelter Island and started looking for a job there. And I found my job in the New York Times. There was a little display ad, and I answered it, and it was this job.
Wow.
Yeah, gives me chills even now to think about it.
Just browsing, just looking through the New York Times.
The Sunday Times had display ads for education, and that's where it turned up.
And so you came out to Shelter Island. Around what year was that?
1989.
And would you come out through the North Fork and then,
yes,
just like it is?
And I had spent my childhood summers on Cape Cod, and this was very similar. The feeling was very similar to that. And so whether I was in a car or on a train, as soon as we got to Riverhead, I'd start singing to myself. I was very happy out here.
Yes. And I guess before you got the job in Greenport at Floyd Memorial Library, how was it just when you did come out? How was it in Greenport and Shelter Island?
It was quiet and a little depressed, sort of gray, even though it was summer. But it was very comfortable.
Did you know anyone at the time else out here?
I had friends who had homes on Shelter Island, summer homes, and my neighbor behind me on Shelter Island. But I didn't know anybody.
So when the ad popped up and you applied, were you also applying to other places at the same time, or this one popped up, you're like, I'm just going to try to focus on this?
Well, I tried to get a job at Southampton College, but they weren't hiring, and they weren't interested. And I was corresponding with other places because I had gone to ALA and interviewed. And I didn't want to go to Moscow, Idaho, or College Station, Texas.
Yes.
They were just too far.
I actually lived in College Station, Texas before too, but
it is too far.
It's far, and different culture and stuff too. But so you interviewed here, and
I interviewed here at the end of July and was offered the job shortly thereafter and started September 1st. So I graduated in May, and by September 1st I was here.
And those first initial days here at the library when you were starting, how would you describe the atmosphere when you first got here? Because it was a smaller building and had to have a different environment.
It was sleepy.
Just like the town was sleepy.
Yeah. The library itself was kind of close, tight. Mm-hmm. The upstairs office, there were two spaces that were office spaces. Mm-hmm. A third of the children's room was the tech processing area, and the front quarter of the reference area or the nonfiction area was the administration. So there was less room for patrons. And the circulation clerk was usually a volunteer. And it was, there were days when we circulated 40 items. and those were only books. And then we did have a video collection, but they were all in brown boxes, made as unattractive as possible.
This was on the VHS,
Yes.
but it just wasn't attractive.
If you want it, you can have it, but
Yeah.
we're not going to make it appealing. It was interesting. One of the first things I did was the cards from the circulation cards were arranged by date due, and I couldn't get my mind around that, because how do you know where to find it to put it back in the book unless you know when it went out? And that was scary that there were so few. So I changed that immediately, much to the horror of my staff. But I started the way I was going to continue.
Yes. And so how were the first, because the expansion didn't come until
98, 97, 98, 99.
But how were the years before that? Did you see what kind of growth in the library before then, and that you needed to expand?
Yes. One of the things that I did was I made more room for the community. The book sale was an ongoing book sale, and it took up what is now the staff area, the technical services area. It took up that entire area, and the children's librarian, who was Poppy, would have story time downstairs on this dreadful shag rug, which things were living in it, I'm sure.
Yes.
And so I moved the technical processing area downstairs and moved the book sale into a smaller area, and created dreadful hurt feelings because I took away all the space. The magazines had been kept in a locked closet, the back issues, and I put those out on shelves so people could find them. I basically was more patron-centered than the library had been. And I think that was just a more modern mindset.
Do you think before they weren't really focused as much on the patrons, or they just were doing what they had with what they had, but they weren't trying to think, I guess, outside of the box in terms of trying to bring in more patrons and making it more?
I'm not sure why it was like that. The librarian I replaced had been here for less than a year. And the librarian she replaced had been here for several years prior to that. There had been a series of librarians, and everybody has their own way of seeing what library service should be. Mine was very patron-centered and very outgoing, and I didn't care that much to protect things. I wanted them to be used.
Yes.
So I was an aficionado of Ranganathan's 5 Rules of Library Science.
Nice. So coming up to how did the expansion come about?
When I was interviewed for the job initially, I was asked if I would be willing to have an expansion, and I said, not yet. I don't know enough. I don't know what the library needs, in my usual blurting manner. So eventually we got to the point where there was no room, and the shelves were crowded, and there was no room for holding programs, and it got to the point where you couldn't really have an adult program in the basement, and we did, but we wanted to do more.
And how did the process come about was there a bond or?
Well, what happened is we first surveyed the community. We picked out community leaders and sent them a survey, and we surveyed everybody. And we used that as the basis for going forward. We financed the expansion with a bond from the perhaps Brookhaven Industrial Development Association Authority. It's a big, thick book somewhere, probably there, of all the papers that were signed. So we used those funds, and then once the library was built, we refinanced with or maybe it was backwards. Maybe we got a bank loan and then refinanced with an IDA. I think that was it. And yeah, that was it.
And did you receive any pushback from people in the community or residents about the expansion?
Sure.
You did?
Yeah, but if decisions were always made with a bow to the people who say no, then things wouldn't get done. There were more people who wanted it to happen, and it went ahead. And the community needed to support the building and to support the library services, and they did.
And how did you decide on the design and architectural components?
We had architects propose their services, and we went with a local architect who seemed to have who seemed to understand that we didn't want the building to look any more than what it was originally, which explains the fact that the entries are similar and the stonework is similar.
Yes.
So I can't remember his name, but he was very sensitive, and he listened and built us a library that looks comfortably like the community. Oh, Garrett Strang.
Garrett
Strang. He's not around anymore.
But in terms of the expansion, where we're sitting now, this was still here.
Yes.
It's as it goes down on
That's
the floor.
Addition.
That's the addition.
Mm-hmm. This was not, the floor wasn't here. This was dug out. And that's why there's this wall here, this short wall that's holding back the earth. Because the earth was up to here, about 4 feet up. So we gained more space. We needed every inch.
And that ended up being the circ area that was added in the children's and upstairs as well.
Yeah.
How was it, I guess, kind of the grand opening? Was there was a ceremony and just kind of...
It was a big deal. We had local luminaries, and we had an art show of portraits of local people done by Neil Fujita, who was quite a well-known artist. And it was a wonderful exhibit. And we had music by a local string quartet and cake. It was nice. It was a nice event.
And then just coming in to work after that, you felt that just more space for people to spread out and patrons to use.
The space, the use of the space has changed over time, and changed multiple times over time. The area that where the AV area and the other side of the room where the computers are and the what I call the co-working space was not that at all. And it was at times it was the YA space, and it just, it has to be flexible. You can't, you have to do what you can with the space that you're given. We had no more room to expand. We didn't own the garden area when we built this.
There was still a house. We went through some struggle to have the house torn down because of some people in the community didn't want it torn down because it was a classic house, although the interior had been in a fire and torn up and redone and generally useless. Although some people thought that we should put books in it, and I didn't think that the floors could hold them. And eventually we convinced the village board that we should be able to
remove it. It was a year-long struggle. We offered it to people to move the house and pay us $1 and take it away. Nothing worked.
Oh,
So
but you ended up being able to get it
demolished.
demolished.
Yes.
What year was that?
I don't know. Shortly after we completed this building, long enough after for me to catch my breath and start another project, which that was.
And what were you thinking of doing over there once that was knocked down or demolished?
We wanted to be able, should the occasion arise, to expand the building, because we expanded to the absolute maximum that we could when we built this. So if you'll note, the back part of the new building is a different stone. And
yes,
we didn't spend the money on the real. So in case at some future time you wanted to expand.
That's why you didn't put the stone there.
Right.
And then I was curious about when you came in, did you have computers?
No. There was one computer which was used to create the interlibrary loan requests. But I'm not sure if there was a modem or if the requests went in the director's bag, back and forth to the system.
It seemed like most, even at schools, it usually was just the one person that had a computer that would do stuff before a lot of places started adding multiple computers, whether it was library or school classroom. But when did it come about that you added computers?
Well, we had to add computers in order to convert the collection to a digital record
from the card
catalog. And we did that by converting to Follett system, a small standalone, pretty simple system. But we had to have a digital connection in order to do that. So we had to be able to download the records or attach our records to downloadable records.
Was that a long process?
Well, we all pitched in.
Yes.
We all pitched in, and it took as long as it took. We laughed about the man who came to teach us how to do this, because it was really a simple process once you were told what to do. But yeah,
it's interesting seeing when libraries transferred over.
Initially, we were on Follett, and I stayed with that standalone system until it became obvious that joining the Suffolk Cooperative Library System PALS organization made the most sense. So I sort of hung on until I was strongly encouraged to join.
And I don't know, I didn't check this, but for SCLS, in terms of it being as a whole group of library systems kind of interconnected together, that came later.
It came later than what?
Then, like, when you first started, was it more independent here? There wasn't like a system, like you had to go to SCLS system in Bellport.
Oh, yes. SCLS has existed for a long time, I think from the 60s.
Okay.
And it went through some rocky times like everything else. But by the time I started, Claudia Muller was the director, and she was hot stuff. She was smart and really library-centered. She left shortly after, I think within a couple of years. And then I think Jerry Nichols took over. And then Kevin, there was somebody named Bruce between Jerry and Kevin, but he didn't last long. My colleagues will tell you that I made him cry.
Oh. And so as after the expansion, could you discuss any other improvements or
It was
things
constantly improving.
constantly?
It was just that's
Mhm.
change is good. You know, Poppy and I were very interested in innovation, and whatever it took to serve the public, that's what we were doing. And we tried everything. If it didn't work, we tried something else. We did a lot of children's programs and participated in the community and did a lot of outreach. We just kept changing as the times changed.
So, kind of fast forwarding, well, I guess actually I had one other question. How did you decide how long were you a director here?
From 1989 to 2020.
And you were here during the pandemic.
Yes.
How was that?
It was awful. I complied with all of the directives from the state, and basically the staff kept everybody at arm's length. We closed the library. We provided library resources under a tent out in the front in boxes and paper bags. When the pandemic first hit and we closed down, we realized that for a lot of people, this was their only social outlet. And so I printed out lists of patrons and phone numbers of all of our regular patrons or people who've been using the library. And we divided the lists up and we called from our homes just to talk, to see if they could, if we could provide anything for them. What did they need? Just have a chat. And I'm sure a lot of libraries did that. It meant a lot to the community that we were reaching out to them. And, over time, the other libraries in Suffolk County all figured out how to provide services and use Zoom and just serve the people.
And at that point, were you thinking about when you wanted to retire?
I had planned to retire in somewhere between June and September of that year, but once the pandemic hit and we were managing all of that, I didn't think it was fair to ask people to come and interview
during the pandemic.
Yeah. But eventually the board found the person who followed me in the job.
Over your time here, what did you enjoy most about your job?
The community
aspect.
Yeah. Just meeting the people. I did a lot of readers advisory. I did a lot of collection development. I liked working with other librarians.
Did you have in terms of collection development, what was your favorite?
I did fiction.
Do you have a favorite author or genre within the fiction, or?
No, that I bought books for the people I knew who borrowed them.
Yes, not for yourself.
Not for myself.
Yeah. And then also, similarly, what was the toughest aspect of your job that you thought of?
Staff supervision.
Just making sure the staff is doing their job and
making sure that they weren't fighting over scarce resources. Or just personalities are always difficult.
Yes, multiple staff, just trying to make sure everyone gets along with some respect. But so now that you're retired, what kind of things do you do now? Are you still active in the community?
So when people ask me, now that you're retired, what are you doing with yourself? I say anything I want. But I am involved with the Shelter Island Library. I'm the treasurer of the Friends of the Library. And I'm still involved with the Friends of Mitchell Park here in Greenport. I'm their treasurer also. I'm interested in how the community flourishes. The Shelter Island Library just passed a huge expansion vote, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. I'm still in touch with many of my colleagues. and I'm interested in libraries in Suffolk County.
Yes. And in terms of what you mentioned, Shelter Island Library, how is you're a treasurer there and at Mitchell
Mhm.
Park?
I'm treasurer of the Friends of the Library,
Oh, okay.
not the library board.
And then looking back now from when you started here to now, I guess in terms of the community, how has Greenport changed?
It's changed enormously around the turn of the century, just after we had finished the expansion. I could see that a lot of young community members were being priced out.
Mhm.
And it's hard when kids that you've nurtured, for a long time leave.
Mhm.
I missed a lot of young families.
Mhm.
I encouraged people to try to do what they could to find a permanent place to live, but families just moved. They left, and I see that the outcome is that there seems to be less of a year-round population.
Mhm.
Although once COVID hit, that the population increased again, but it was not the same people. It's not the fishermen, not the carpenters, not the laborers, not the farmers.
Like people coming out from
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. And then I think some people would say they stayed here a longer because of the pandemic, but once that ended, they went back to just maybe come out in the summertime. But would you say you see a similar thing on Shelter Island, or would you say it's a different community?
Even more so.
Even more so.
Yeah. Housing is an incredible burden for most people.
Mm-hmm.
So that concerns me.
Yes, I think even now we're seeing, since after the pandemic, we're still seeing people having to move, but when we see people come in and they're renovating homes here, and they're usually come in the summertime more so than.
Right. Well, we always had an increase in library use and population in the summer. It was fun,
Mhm.
to just the change in the personalities
Mhm.
and the change in the busyness. People, when I first started here, people would say, "Oh, what do you do?" And February was wonderful.
Yes. I mean, I think I still get that somewhat today, but I mean, it's nice being able to do you have time to work on other things.
Right.
So it's interesting.
So, the things that we take for granted in terms of library services, like no fines. Well, Poppy and I started that very, very early. I think we went to some sort of a NILA fundraising dinner somewhere, and someone else talked about that. And we said, well, that's a great idea. And we brought it back, and the board said, okay, we'll try it. So anything that we could do to encourage the use of the library, to ease the burden of being a policeman on the staff, we did.
And that when around what for the
2005, 2008. You'd have to ask Janet. Janet might know.
Yes.
She started in, I believe, 2008.
And that's pretty early on, because a lot of libraries didn't do it till
right,
like 32 years ago.
Right.
So that was way ahead.
But because we're a small library, the dollar amount of those fines, as it contributed to the budget, was very small. And so putting out a donation box basically replaced that without causing conflict at the desk.
Yes.
It was very nice. It was a big change and very pleasant.
From people.
From telling people that they had to give me a quarter.
Yes.
Like, I'm sorry, you can't use your card because you owe us
25
25
cents.
cents.
So, did you notice anything else in Greenport? Because you said when you first got here, it was kind of quiet and a little more gritty, but have you noticed any other change in the area? I mean, would you say it's still quiet for most of the time here, or?
I don't know the answer to that. It depends upon what you're paying attention to. So I'm not paying attention to the day-to-day life in Greenport. There are more restaurants, more real estate offices, more people on the sidewalks in the summer. I think that the new administration is very forward-looking. I'm excited to see what comes of that. Greenport is a really special place, and I hate to see it just become a destination as opposed to a place where people live and raise their kids.
I have one other kind of question. What do you hope for the future of the library and the community? I guess it could be tied in. It would be interesting to hear what you hope for the future of this library.
I'm very happy with the current situation here. I was not happy with the person who came after me, but I like the staff here. I think they're excellent at their jobs and excited about doing them. And I don't see the same level of discomfort that I saw shortly after I left. I think that you can do anything.
And then just for Greenport as a whole, you kind of mentioned a little bit that you don't want it to become a destination. But was there anything else you hope for the future of the community?
I'd like to see the community remain the caring place that I knew it to be. I think that the school has the potential to be wonderful. And I know that compared to other schools on the North Fork, the kids are wonderful and they're cared for here. And I think that cooperation between the school and the library is a very important part. And it's hard to do because everybody's got a different set of responsibilities.
Yes. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss or talk about?
Well, we could talk about my chickens.
Your chickens.
I have 2 chickens. The first one moved in because I spoke to her. She was living up the street from me, and she was hanging out right by the side of the dirt road that I live on. And I told her that was not safe. And then she appeared at my house and did not leave. So we accepted the responsibility and got her a chicken coop. And she had chicks. So now, one of her chicks survived. So now I have 2 chickens.
Wonderful.
Yes.
No, that was like a brand new thing that.
Yes, that was a retirement gift. Right. Yeah, I know. You never expected that.
No.
But a lot of people have chickens.
It seems a little more popular now.
Uh-huh.
It's
right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, and the other thing that I really wanted to share is that I met Bruce here shortly after I arrived, and we've been together for 34 years.
Wow.
So all of my library acquaintances think that's very romantic.
Yes.
I met him in the 100s. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in today, and I want to thank you for all you've done for the library and the community. So, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks. I enjoyed talking to you, and I like coming into the library now.
Yes, thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 17 with Lisa Richland. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you soon.